Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Don't really understand the Cardinals, but fine. Good for them.
It's a fine day when Green Bay misses out on a good free agent. It's a good day. I will certainly take that.
I would say Vikings fans should be relatively happy about that.
Yeah, anytime you can avoid seeing J.J. Watt twice in a season, you should take that. You should take that path. We'll be talking about that in just a moment. Just want to thank you guys so much for listening. Once again, we are in the off season. We got just a couple things to talk about. Not a ton of Vikings-oriented stuff in the beginning of the show, but when we hit the mailbag, we're going to be going over a lot of specific topics, including the wide receivers, the draft, we get to break out Arif's beekeeping corner again, which is something we've been wanting to do for a while, that sort of thing. But before we start, just want to again thank you guys so much for listening. We have some cool stuff. We just put out a Patreon bonus episode that was over 30 minutes last week. So if you're interested in such a thing, you can go over to patreon.com/NorseCode and access the bonus material there. Just about every week, we're going to be putting out material, whether it's our show here every 2 weeks, or we'll be putting out a bonus episode here on Patreon. Usually it's going to be a couple of minutes, but last episode we had it be like 30 minutes because I had 3 shows worth of stuff to go through. So we had a bunch of Dusty stuff on there. So if you are jonesing for more Dusty material, that's where you can find it over at patreon.com/NorseCode. Also, just want to give a quick thank you to Justin Martin over at Patreon, who is our newest subscriber. Again, you can support us through there, or you can go to paypal.me/NorseCode as well, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com if you find the need for some Norse Code swag. Again, we're not trying to raise a bunch of money here or anything, but if you are interested in a Norse Code shirt from the awesome Drop Play Dave, you can find our logo on a number of different things, baby onesies, masks, random accoutrement. You can find them over at norsecode.threadless.com. That is going to be our short intro because we have some real news to get into. And while I was asking questions earlier today, the news about J.J. Watt came out. And J.J. Watt is not leaking his information as to where he's going via Peloton. That was the big thing earlier today. And anyone who took the Peloton thing seriously, I really have to question your sanity.
Yeah, I wasn't really around for the Peloton stuff. So when I got a DM from somebody saying, JJ Watt was trolling about the Peloton, I was like, he was doing the what about the witch? What?
I've heard about social media for biking people exists. Absolutely. I haven't looked into it, but I have to assume that the Peloton people, being as online as they are, would have to have something. It would have to have a place where they could sit and talk to other people about Peloton, because they can't talk about it in person. So I would imagine they have to have some form of social media on that. So the idea that JJ Watt had a Peloton amused me to no end for some reason.
He evidently doesn't.
Yeah, it's like Joe Biden he just flat out said it's like, I don't have a bike. which BC dad Brad took offense to, but you could say he said Joe Biden has one. That was a big thing that came up in the news at one point. It was like Joe Biden has one and could be a security risk, whatever. You look at Joe Biden, 70 plus year old politician. Okay, I could see Peloton there. JJ Watt is like, I don't think he's at low impact at this point, but I mean maybe. And maybe I'm just making assumptions here, but it seemed off. It seemed odd. So the idea that JJ Watt had a Peloton social media account where he was now listing the 3 places that he was willing to go, listing Green Bay first. It's like, there's no way this actually is worse than stalking the people over Flight Tracker.
It is actually. It's worse. And yeah, at least we've got like a long college tradition of using like flight trackers to see where coaches are going and stuff. Like at least there's been that, and it's a lot less creepy because like it's a flight. You're in public, right? But this is just like a in theory, I guess, a Peloton account, which, like you said, I didn't know had its own internal social media system, which I guess it kind of makes sense watching the ads because there's like competitions and teams and stuff like that. And there probably is some sort of networking feature that can allow you to message other members of the team or participate in the competitions or whatever. So I guess it makes sense. But like also JJ Watt hinted on his Peloton social media account. Okay, yeah, sure, fine, whatever.
A dumber sentence has yet to be said today. It's like that sentence itself is just should just scream. In any other year, like 2-3 years ago, you say something like when the Peloton ads were first coming out, like in any other year, you read that sentence and it's just immediately like, this is a Mad Lib if I've ever read one. just ridiculous. But the Cardinals signed JJ Watt for a reasonable amount of money as far as guaranteed stuff is concerned.
31 million over 2 years, 23 million guaranteed, something like that. Yeah, I mean, what, like $15-16 million over the course of 2 years, average annual value. Because it's a 2-year deal, you're not likely to be able to kind of shut that off in cap. So it's probably, 14-15 million year one, 16-17 million year two. Great. I think that makes a ton of sense in terms of his value. He was slated to be a cap hit of something like $17 million. He was obviously expected to make less in Houston when they released him. This obviously means he was a tradable asset. I guess they released him as like a favor to him, but it still feels weird because he can essentially host free agency if he requests a trade, right? Like, that's wild to me that the Texans got nothing out of Joe. And they're not even going to get a compensatory pick because they cut him.
Exactly. The other thing that's weird is like you look at the last couple of years of the front office for the Texans, specifically the last two, as they dealt away all of the pieces of that ship, and they were at least able to get something, not anything of like value, but they were at least able to get something to say we were able to do it. They released him. They're not getting anything compensatory. There was some argument on the Texans subreddit about that. Like, no, you're not getting anything compensatory. You got nothing for JJ Watt taking off. At some point it's less of a thing about a favor to the player and be like, as the organization, we have to get something for this, right? Or are they just all in on the tank at this point?
No, because if you're tanking, the whole point of tanking is to increase the value of the assets that you have, right? To improve the draft pick that you have. And so if you're foregoing draft picks, there's no tanking. You're just being dumb. There's no benefit. And again, I understand like the idea that you're trying to help out somebody that's helped you out. But like that was a hard one to believe just because the Texans have been jerking around their own players for so long. Like Andre Johnson even like made this point when he was saying that Watson should do whatever he can to get traded. Like, the organization does not care about you. And the idea that they were just being classy to Watt this one instance, Watt led the mutiny that got Bill O'Brien fired, right?
They tanked at tanking. They somehow messed up tanking.
And this isn't a criticism of Watt, obviously. He did the right thing by leading a mutiny. Good job, dude. But like, what player is compelled to do that if they think the organization is doing right by them, right? Like, no one. So it is very weird that this all got put together. But yeah, JJ Watt goes together with Chandler Jones, and that's going to be a nice pass rush duo. The Cardinals don't really have much of a defense outside of that. You take a look at their needs in the draft, and these websites are listing all kinds of needs. I mean, they've got linebacker, defensive back, everybody but Budda Baker, essentially. They need maybe an interior defensive lineman. They need an off-ball linebacker. Hassan Reddick's a free agent. I imagine they'll franchise him. But he's an off-ball linebacker that can blitz, or he can be an edge rusher. But obviously, that's not going to be the case now. But either way, they need players at multiple positions. They've got everybody available for upgrade except for Budda Baker. And so it's not going to be a very good defense. It gets obviously marginally better with Watt, but without the rest of the defense around him, his impact is going to be a little bit limited. What I find weird is that there were a couple of people that were saying that, Watt perceived the Cardinals to be a contender, and that's why he signed with them. And maybe, I don't know, that could be the case, but I don't know that is the best explanation, right? Like, of all the probable explanations, that one seems the least likely to me. They went 8-8 last year. Their point differential was like +9 or something like that. It wasn't great. They finished the year with a losing streak. Obviously, a lot of those were close games, and they were able to beat it out because of that Hail Mary, which admittedly was one of the best plays ever. But it wasn't indicative of an organization that was reasonably strong. It's also a fairly good division. Regardless of who the quarterback is in San Francisco, they seem to be able to compete. Obviously, you don't know what the situation with Russell Wilson is in Seattle, but I think for now you can say that they're a contender for the division. Obviously, the Rams are in a really great spot. They just upgraded a quarterback, and they've got kind of a great supporting cast. They're going to lose some guys, but for the most part, they're really they're in a really fantastic place. So it's a really tough division, a division that they didn't make the playoffs out of. They got beat by the Bears to get into the playoffs. So there is a good probability that they could make the playoffs. I don't know that there's any reasonable probability that they could contend for a title. Does J.J. Watt think that Kyler Murray is a really fantastic quarterback? From my understanding, that they have some kind of relationship going back a little bit, but I don't know. Maybe it's just like a weird way to evaluate things because, and this is what was it Will Brinson was saying? Like, why can't J.J. Watt? He said something like, "Why can't J.J. Watt choose the Cardinals because he thinks they're a contender?" And then he listed all of the things. And one of those things is that Kyler Murray could take the next step. They had like 5 one-score losses, etc. And it's like, yeah, in a vacuum. This is my response. I already tweeted this out. Sorry for people who already followed me on Twitter and already saw this tweet. But, in a vacuum, that makes sense. Right? The Cardinals could turn into a contender, and it's not very implausible. Like, you can envision that scenario pretty easily. But that wasn't his choice. His choice wasn't a bunch of maybe contenders that he could choose between. It was between people who contended, right, last year and are contenders now and all of them won playoff games, versus somebody that might make it into the playoffs. Like, if things go the right way, they could be a contender versus is a contender, right? The rumors were that, Buffalo, Green Bay, Cleveland, his offers were something in the $15 million range, I guess. He had a bunch of offers, apparently, which, again, makes a ton of sense. And so those were his choices. And it's fine that he didn't choose to go to a contender. I think that that's great, right? Because in certain contexts, people will praise that and say this player really cares about football. This player really cares about, the quote unquote the right thing, about winning, about developing a team, and prioritizing the things that matter, which I guess is winning. And so sometimes it's a good thing, but sometimes it's a bad thing. Like Kevin Durant going to the Golden State Warriors, right? Like they're just ring chasing. They're afraid of greatness. They can't make it by themselves. It's very weird how we frame these things. I think if he chose to go to the Cardinals because he has friends on the Cardinals and that Arizona weather is nice and that they gave him a boatload of money, I think that's cool as hell. Do that, dude. That's great. Fine. We don't have to say it's because J.J. Watt is a really great evaluator of quarterback talent and use that skill that he has to identify which team he wants to go to. Because it turns out there are a lot of teams that he could have gone to that have quarterback talent. Like he could have gone to the Packers or he could have gone to the Bills. But no, I mean, he went to the Cardinals. That's fine. It's just a very odd choice from the perspective of like winning. From other perspectives, like, yeah, it's pretty great weather. If I spent like 9 years in Houston, I wouldn't necessarily want to go back to Wisconsin, right?
Oh yeah, and the other thing that you could look at here too is that he chose like a fix me up. Like he chose a team that's not necessarily ready
Right.
or there.
This
And he's
is my
just a
argument
2-year.
for him.
This is a
Yeah.
2-year contract.
Yeah, he can turn around and make money off of this again. And this is my argument for him potentially going to the Cleveland Browns, right? Because he can turn into the face of a successful franchise, even though the Browns have already made it, right? Like they already made the playoffs. They already won a playoff game. There's still something appealing about going to the Browns and being a critical part of the first Super Bowl run they've ever had, right? Of a historically beleaguered franchise and being able to turn it around and be a fix-me-up. And I think that there's something a little bit egotistical about it, but it's totally understandable and it's fine. And it's kind of a reason that I liked being like on the debate teams I was on, which I mean, I'm calling myself egotistical, like real big shock there. But like, it's fun. It's fun to think that you're a big part of turning around a team, or in my case, like a school, right? And being a part of the reason that they've established a program or big and successful or whatever. And this is a pitch that a lot of college recruiters will use too, right? Like, hey, I've coached quarterbacks to be the first overall pick in the NFL. I just took this head coaching job here at this program that hasn't been good in a while, but I know that you and me together can work to make this program a national powerhouse. So I need you to come to Arizona State or whatever. I don't know. That's a pitch that they use, that you can become the reason that this franchise turns it around and becomes a nationally competitive program. I feel like that could be a reason that Watt was potentially attracted to Arizona, but that doesn't mean they're a contender.
No, and it doesn't even have to mean that. It really just the fact that he ended up signing a 2-year deal really screamed to me that this was like one of two things. It was like, I'm going to attempt to I haven't been healthy for the last couple of years in Houston. So what I can do is I can turn this around, sign for more, and like have my demand to be a little higher in 2 years if I want to do that. Or I can kind of play up to where I'm at and really just have fun with Russell Wilson's makeshift offensive line.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
It's like he has the ability to do something here that's kind of interesting. And Russell Wilson has been unsuccessful in trying to get people to think that he's actually like leaving. Other than the mayor of New Orleans, apparently, who's willing to welcome him with open arms. But Russell Wilson is already trying to is doing the whole I don't want to be traded, but if I were traded, these are the 4
right.
I'm not going to cheat on my wife, but if I was going to cheat, these are the 4 places I'm willing to go to. No, that's not a thing. The idea of him in Chicago would be interesting.
That's the terrifying one.
That's something else. Yeah, Wentz in Chicago wouldn't have phased me. That would have been hilarious.
That's funny as hell.
That's yeah, exactly. But Wentz in not Wentz, Wilson in Chicago, boy, that would be interesting if they get their defense back in and really and get some actual weapons for Wilson. That would be real interesting in Chicago. That said, it seems like there's one QB rumor every year where you just sit and go, there's no way there's any like real truth to that, or there's no way anything with that actually happens. I don't know if it necessarily is going to be happening with the with Deshaun Watson. I am willing to bet there's no way they're going to do anything with Russell Wilson here.
Yeah, I think they're going to find a way to hold on to him.
Yeah, that seems a bit ridiculous. But I mean, look who he's running away from this year. And now it includes J.J. Watt.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, Russell Wilson is a fantastic scrambler. He doesn't want to have to do that every other play. He may end up doing that this year. This is a really, really stacked defense in the NFC West. The other big thing that we wanted to talk about, especially because it really plays into your brand, is right after we finished recording and posted our episode 2 weeks ago, we got the news that Carson Wentz was traded over to Indianapolis for nowhere near the quote-unquote leaked numbers that were coming out as for what his demand was, or what Philly was demanding, or what the offers were going to be anyway, like 2 first rounders and all that.
Yeah, they got
Carson,
like a third and a future fourth or something like that. Do you have the compensation in front of you?
I believe it was a second and well, let's pull this up here. The Carson Wentz trade, which I mean, it was certainly something, and Wentz seems happy, and the Colts seem happy, I guess. And the Eagles are now free to decide if they're going to take Jalen Hurts or end up picking a different quarterback.
Okay, so it's a third round pick and a conditional second round pick
Yes.
that turns into a first round pick if he plays at least 75% of the Colts' offensive snaps, or the Colts make the playoffs and he plays 70% of the snaps, which actually 70% is a fairly easy bar to hit. So, if the Colts make the playoffs, it's probably a first rounder. That's funny to me.
I mean, the organization didn't do him a ton of favors at the very end. Carson Wentz also did not do the organization very many favors of this play.
No, he didn't. And also, like, I just feel like, and this is like, I don't tend to do a ton of when players express their concerns or being selfish takes, because I really hate that genre of take. But I really did not like the energy of Carson Wentz leaking that he was going to demand a trade the day that Jalen Hurts was slated to start. Like, dude, like, wait a day and a half at least, right? Like, the day that Jalen Hurts is going to start, you're like, yeah, I'm out of here. Screw this. Like, we all know that you don't want to be the bench warmer. I wouldn't want to be the bench warmer. Fine, I get it. But, like, it's game day, my dude. Like, let people focus and relax.
Yeah.
Wait until, like, Victory Monday or whatever.
I'm reminded of, and I'm not saying that Jalen Hurts is going to turn into the next Eli Manning or something for successful or otherwise. But I'm reminded of when Kurt Warner was benched for Eli, and I imagine he didn't want to do it. He didn't want to be benched or whatever. But you take that moment and be like, okay, I'm not going to leak it to the press the day of that I'm going to demand a trade and that this whole situation stinks and the court I've lost all faith in our coach. Nobody's talked to me for weeks. Like, no, that's not how you do things around here. And let me tell you what, I had a fun moment walking through Shields recently, who pays Carson Wentz a lot of money to endorse their stores and appear in their commercials. I had a fun moment going through Shields the other day and seeing all of the discount Eagles equipment, or all the discount Eagles stuff, because this corner of North Dakota is all about following Carson Wentz wherever he goes. And I already saw the Colts stuff out, but all the Eagles stuff is heavily discounted. Fantastic. Discounted. So if you want a Carson Wentz Eagles jersey for like $10, you can find yourself over at Shields, just like I did when I picked up my Diggs jersey. It's like, even the material is more expensive than what they're actually charging. All right, whatever. I'm not going to complain about a $15 2X Diggs jersey there, but yeah, it's already switching over to the indie thing. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with Trey Lance, if Trey Lance ends up getting the same, I guess, love.
Right.
Not necessarily a North Dakota born quarterback, but probably still North Dakota tough, if you ask John Gruden.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Just ridiculous.
Actually, the Kurt Warner example is really funny to me because if I remember, they were winning under Kurt Warner, like 5-4, something like that. And they benched him because they lost like 2 games in a row. Like, yeah, woe's the Giants, I guess. Mind you, they had to get a losing record to get to Eli Manning in the first place. But yeah, okay, so they go 5-4, and his statistics are not like amazing. He's a passer rating in the mid 80s, and just net yards per attempt is not like among the league leaders or anything like that. And he's not young, right? He's like 30 something at that point because he entered the league pretty late, and he's just coming off of like no longer being like relevant anymore for the Rams, right?
Yeah, he was sliding between. He was already in the slide between a tier 2 and a tier 3.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And so they thought that they could do better with Eli Manning, and Like the thing about that is like Kurt Warner's like statistics were at the time like league average. Like they weren't awful. They were 5-4, so they were about average. And Eli Manning was abysmal his rookie year. Like they won one game under him, which let's say we don't want to do quarterback wins. Fine. Eli Manning has a 4.6 interception percentage, which means that the touchdown interception ratio was 6-9. That his passer rating was in the 50s. His adjusted net yards per attempt was the worst in the NFL. Like below Ken Dorsey and AJ Feely. Like, yeah, Kurt Warner probably could have been like, dude, what the hell is this? What? Seriously, dudes?
Yep.
But he didn't, right? Which like I would have at some point been like, yeah, I find this interesting. And I would have been like pretty passive aggressive about it. This is a curious state of affairs. Luckily he had like a void in his contract. So he voided the second year of his contract and sought free agency. But like, yeah, Jalen Hurts didn't even get to start a game. And also, Carson Wentz was bad. Like, Kurt Warner was average, right? Carson Wentz was bad. And he was like, man, I can't believe how they're treating me. Like, what?
Yeah, it was difficult to watch some of those Wentz games and either the overthrows or just the pure gold interceptions. And we mentioned this. We're not trying to just bury the player completely. This is something that was watchable. That was watched rather all year. If you were going, what is going on with Wentz, and you were able to extrapolate it further and be like, okay, well, what happened to Wentz since that ACL injury? And it's like it's just all been a version of that same thing. So yeah, it's interesting. The idea, the narrative, if you want to call it the narrative on Wentz now is that he's going to
his old offensive coordinator, right? Like Frank Reich.
Yep.
And so
that guy's
going to fix him.
This is going to be the fix. If he can't fix him, if he can't do something here, he's lost. And at that point he becomes like the next Tebow. And he's like, is somebody going to sign him? I mean, he was productive at one point. I was going to say he's got a playoff win, but he doesn't.
He doesn't. But he's got a playoff berth, not even an appearance, but he's got a playoff, winning team behind him. I guess he led the Eagles to most of the way to the playoffs.
And you know what, the game that he played that he got injured in, because that was against LA, that was against the Rams. That was an exciting game. He was doing really well. He made I would call a boneheaded decision to do what he did in the end zone to get hurt. But
we tend to praise quarterbacks for that decision regardless. But I agree. Yeah. Not a smart decision. Good quarterbacks tend to make that decision.
It really didn't pay off for him in a number of different ways, and he found himself hurt, and the team ended up winning a Super Bowl without him. And I imagine that burns on a fella too.
Yeah. Since then, it's been. And like the thing is, I can totally like this is like just kind of a weird thing about the way humans work, right? Like I can imagine that at every moment during the Super Bowl run, he was excited and happy for his teammates, and then all off season, like it ate at him, right? Like and just in ways that you push the thought away because it's uncharitable, but it comes at you from different directions or whatever. Like I can imagine that genuinely in the moment he was totally happy and fine. And just like as time went on, it just stewed. Like, I can see that. But I mean, it's on him to get better, and he didn't. So,
how telling is it that 3 years after that Super Bowl win, who's left in Philly?
Alshon Jeffrey.
I thought they released him, or there are plans to release him. I had read something about how there were plans to release Alshon Jeffrey.
Eagles to release Alshon Jeffrey when new league year begins. Okay, yeah. Wow, okay, you nailed it. Lane Johnson. That's who's left. Because it's not even Jason Peters or I don't think Jason Kelsey either. Not Brandon Brooks, so neither of the guards. I guess one of those tight ends is going to be because Dallas Goedert was a rookie that year, maybe. Because Zach Ertz might be gone too, right?
That's also been discussed. Yeah.
Good Lord, yeah. This is a bloodshedding. Good Lord.
like
They're all gone.
Bill Simmons had a thing a couple of years ago. It's probably closer to 12. That he had a thing that said that once you win a Super Bowl, once you win a championship, you've got like 5 years before you can really start to complain about like how your team is terrible or how they've like done whatever, or like, and we're never going to win again or whatever. It's like, and I've always kind of like held true to that belief to a certain extent. I don't know if it necessarily applies as much in the like win now version of the NFL, but like you should have some bit of context to your complaining. And boy, I think that if there's a team,
that's the way to put it.
I think if there's a team that has the ability, or like a fan base that has the ability to go, we're not, going to do anything for a while, it's going to be them. Like congratulations. Since there's like no one left on your team from that championship run, you officially have the right to complain. Just don't throw any full beer cans at me when I'm walking in Philadelphia.
Right.
Punch your own horses.
So I just looked at, so Dallas Goedert was not on that team. I was like, well, Greg Ward was on that team, and it's true, but we can't count him because he was not on the team in 2018. He was on the practice squad, and then he was with the San Antonio Commanders in 2019.
I was going to say, I bet he was a practice squad guy.
Yeah. Well, in 2017, maybe he wasn't, but certainly in 2019, he was in the AAF. And if you leave and come back, that doesn't really count.
No.
So probably certain members of that defense, right? I have to, like Fletcher Cox. So it's Fletcher Cox and Lane Johnson. Wow. Guys. Wow. Yep. I'm sure there's like some backup defensive tacklers, but even like a lot of the defensive players are not there, right? Like, I mean, Brandon Graham is still there, right? I'm just now Googling random members of the Eagles.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he's there. Fine, great.
The Vikings made the NFC Championship that year. We didn't win, but we made the NFC Championship. I'm willing to bet there are far more Vikings on this team than there are
even if everybody that you project to be like a cap casualty or a trade target or whatever, like Kyle Rudolph and Riley Reiff, and let's say that instead of restructuring Anthony Barr, they cut him, whatever. Like, even if you project all of the people whose contracts they need to rework as cuts, the Vikings will significantly likely have more players on their 2021 roster from that run than the Eagles.
It's probably twice. It's probably 2 times. That's ridiculous. Yeah. Anyway, the question was whether or not the Eagles won the trade or Indy won the trade. And I think anytime you eat that much dead cap, I don't think anyone can say that you won a trade.
Yeah, I would say the Eagles. I mean, so in the like no win situation that they're in, I think the Eagles came out further ahead than they could have been. Right. It's kind of like the Stephon Diggs trade. I think that the Vikings, in a vacuum, like not knowing that Justin Jefferson would turn out to be like the greatest rookie receiver of all time, in a vacuum, not knowing that, I think the Vikings did not get good compensation for Stephon Diggs. But that was not the scenario that the Vikings were in. It very much seemed like, and maybe it's not the case, it very much seemed like Diggs was forcing his way out. And in a situation where you're required to trade, and teams know that, the Vikings probably got the best deal available. And then, now that we know that, they ended up with Justin Jefferson, although they shouldn't have. When the Eagles traded up, they should have grabbed Justin Jefferson. I fully expected them to. It made all the sense in the world. I was like, Justin Jefferson is in a tier of his own. So there's the top 3 in one tier. You can order them however you want: CeeDee Lamb, Henry Ruggs, and Jerry Jeudy, right? I don't know what order you're going to put him in. I would say Ruggs is last, and CeeDee Lamb is first, and Jerry Jeudy second. And then, so that's tier 1. And then tier 2 to me was Justin Jefferson. And then tier 3 had like Reagor and Pittman and so on, right? And T. Higgins. And so I was like, it's very clear that they're trading up to get Justin Jefferson. So the Vikings should not have gotten him, right? And so I don't think we can say for certain that the Vikings were like so prescient in it. I think they got lucky, which is like fine, right? But yeah, in the same situation, like where the Eagles could not come out ahead on this trade, they probably got as much as you could have reasonably expected. I think the Colts overpaid, which I mean, I obviously think that, but like, I mean, that's not a shock to anybody listening. But yeah, I also like, I'm very suspicious of the idea that there's only one coach that can figure out how to turn a quarterback from bad to elite. Like, the quarterback's probably not elite, and that year was probably a fluke. That's more likely closer to the truth than, yeah, this guy has the skeleton key to this other guy. They're like soulmates, but instead of like lovers, they're like coach and quarterback. Like, yeah, he's the one guy in the universe that can figure out how to make Carson Wentz throw straight. Come on.
I've heard worse plots for sports movies, but this is kind of pushing it. But I guess we'll see. I'm curious to see what ends up happening with Indy coming up. It's if they're not paying him a whole mess because a whole lot because they're still having most of that debt cap there. But yeah, it's interesting. Let's head over to a question that we got in the mailbag. We're not actually hitting the mailbag yet, but there was a question that came in about a tweet that was sent out about the 2009 through 2016 QBs, and it was from Field Yates, and I appreciated this, and I the first time I saw it, I knew we had to talk about it. It was like, with the trade of Carson Wentz, there will now not be a single QB drafted in the first round from 2009 to 2016 that is still with his original team. 0 out of 22. And he listed them: 2009, Stafford, Sanchez, Freeman; 2010, Bradford, Tebow; 2011, Cam Newton, Jake Locker; Gabbert, Ponder. That also says Lowell next to it. And Andrew Luck, retired, RG3, backup for the Ravens; Tannehill, Whedon, which was always a weird choice; EJ Manuel, 2013, 2014, Bortles, Manziel, also Lowell; Bridgewater, 2015, Winston and Mariota; 2016, Goff, Wentz, and Lynch, also Lowell. So it's a weird mixture of QBs, and they all have the same thing in common. None of them are with their original team.
Yeah. So someone also like sent in a question, right? Like, because it wasn't just you, James, but like I think someone asked a question either to the mailbag or to just me personally, because I think I got an email to this extent. How can we expect like the 2021 class to be any different? And like part of it is that like this is a very funny coincidence, essentially. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's hilarious, but like it is also like a coincidence. Like some of these guys are not like busts; they're just with different teams, right? Like Matt Stafford, I would argue, is not a bust. He's just with a different team that just like didn't work out, right? Andrew Luck was not a bust. He just got killed too many times. And like Cam Newton, I would argue, is not a bust. He just got killed too many times and then also got into a car crash. Which, man, we never talk about that. Like that, he got into like a car crash.
He got into a nasty car crash. He ended up getting COVID. And
that's right. Yeah, he got COVID. What a lot has happened to this guy. And like all he does on the field is smile. It is frightening.
And apparently he's not going to be spending as much money on clothes this year, which is an adult thing to do. I get that. You can just go back to the one tone, outfit. It'll be fine.
Right. Yeah. But like Bridgewater was on the path to potentially being a hit. I think that what we saw in the 2016 training camp was like a completely different player. It could have been good. I don't know. That's speculation, but it looks like Tannehill might have been talented the whole time. The issue is that he was playing for Adam Gase. That's a totally reasonable
as it turns out.
Right. And it turns out for him to get out from under Gase, he had to leave instead of Gase, which like, good job, Dolphins. You figured it out. But yeah, but like also the reason that date was chosen as a cutoff was because the 2017 and 2018 classes were like fantastic. So Deshaun Watson is no longer going to be with the Texans. Either he's going to be with another team or he's going to be like pseudo retired, right? But like Deshaun Watson, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, and also we can add Baker Mayfield and Josh Allen too this year. So like with that in mind, like why would the 2021 class be any different from the 2018 class versus like the 2016 class, right? I don't know. Like I haven't done a ton to study these quarterbacks, but like there's a lot of indication from people who keep historical records of the grades that they put on quarterbacks that Trevor Lawrence might be the best prospect that they've seen since Luck, right? And Luck was the best prospect since Elway. And so Trevor Lawrence is very likely going to be a hit, relatively speaking. So that's great. And then we see kind of all these other quarterbacks are going to be fine. I think that Justin Fields has like a bunch of upside and a bunch of like ambiguity. We don't know if he's going to be any good. I think the same thing is true of Zach Wilson. And then there's a safety in this class that people are going to draft as a quarterback. We'll see how Trey Lance does. Mac Jones is being talked about as a first-round pick. I don't know. He seems fine to me. He seems like a second-round pick to me, but I haven't done a super deep dive. But that's like 5 quarterbacks that seem talented enough to be a first-round pick. I wager that one of them will stick around with their team for more than 5 years. So that's going to be kind of fun. But what an insane truth, right? The 2009 and like going back to 2009 is a little bit cheap, right? Because like, yeah, there's no one from like the 1985 draft class that's with their original team either, huh? Well, how weird is that? Like at some point it's like, well, that was like 16 years ago or whatever, right? Like that was a while ago, or 12 years ago, I guess. It was 12 years ago. Like, you know, quarterbacks tend to stick with teams a little bit longer and one can reasonably, but I mean, like Stafford might have considered retiring instead of being traded, right? Like that was on the table. So I don't know.
Eventually, the answer to the question of how can we know that that the 2021 class can be different is the actual answer to the question turns into something along the lines of like, eventually coincidences have to end, because otherwise they're not really coincidences. Something like terrible as afoot.
Right. Like we have to be fatalistic about the future of quarterbacking in the NFL. Like that's it. Quarterbacks are dead. Like
there's your national article for The Athletic. The QB position is dead. It'll confuse everyone who's been listening to your like the running back is dead.
No. Throwing the ball is still good. It's just going to be really ugly.
Arif's take on the Carson Wentz trade. Yeah. But yeah, eventually coincidences have to even themselves out. Otherwise, they're not coincidences. And this is admittedly a long set of coincidences. But I just don't know if you can keep calling it a coincidence when you hit, all of a sudden you hit 2017. It's like, oh, well, here's some real talent. Here's some real and some organizations that are probably going to end up doing right by somebody. Well, they've already done right for Kansas City. So yeah, it was something I wanted to bring up because I thought it was entertaining, and it was worth mentioning as a result of that. But yeah, I thought that was pretty great. We are going to hit the mailbag. We're actually going to start off looking at the wide receiver position for the Vikings. I realize that we're something like 40-ish minutes into the show, and now we're talking about Viking stuff. But
what?
Yeah, but we are going to talk about some Minnesota Viking stuff. We're going to talk about the wide receiver right now specifically. Tommy Gunn asks, in what season will Thielen fall off a cliff a la Jordy Nelson, in which we realize far too late that we have no one beyond him and Jefferson on the depth chart?
So Jordy Nelson, his fall off year was like 32, right? Like the year that he turned 32 was the year everyone realized he was like broken. And when he was 31, there was like, I think a lot of discussion that he might be washed. Yeah. And I think for the first half of that year was not going well, and then he got to play a couple of games and it went pretty well. I think what is his third game of good play in a row was against the Vikings. I remember that because I wrote an article. Don't worry about Jordy Nelson. He's done. These last 2 games are pretty good, but that's just an outlier. And then I think he dusted the Vikings. So good job, Arif. But yeah, he completely fell off at 32 years old. So Adam Thielen is like pretty old for how much experience he's had in the NFL. He turns 32 in August of next year. So not this year, he'll be 31. This year we get he's going to be bad for half the year and then good for the second half of the year. And then everyone's going to be like, we don't got to worry about this age thing. But it's next year. He's just going to be, done. So obviously because there's only 2 white wide receivers in NFL history, and they're Adam Thielen and Jordy Nelson, they're 1-to-1 comparisons and will fall off at about the same time.
Yeah. That's how this sort of sampling works.
Yeah, that's science.
It's hard to argue that. It's not opinion. This is certainly science. That is a horribly what's the word I'm looking for? Terrifying
Racist? Oh,
prospect.
yes, terrifying. Also terrifying.
Let's go with
In addition.
let's go with both. Let's just go with both. The Allen Robinson Liberation Front
Wow,
asks,
what a name. Man, it's been a tough 80 years.
Arif's piece said that Robinson could be a nice signing for the Vikings. My question is, would I be able to disband my group having its goals fulfilled, or would him being a Viking actually preclude him from deliverance?
Okay, well, yeah, it would preclude him from deliverance unless liberation just meant playing with a good enough quarterback that your statistics reflect your talent, in which case he'd be fine. But it depends really on what your goals are. And I imagine that they're different from like the People's Front of Allen Robinson, right? Like I would have to imagine that because all your goals as disparate Allen Robinson groups are different. That getting Allen Robinson a ring, that one's not going to be fulfilled by the Vikings. Getting him the recognition he deserves, that might be getting him the statistical reality that he can play with a decent enough quarterback to get him the ball. That would be. So it really depends on what your specific goals are and whether or not you have to start a war with the other liberation organizations surrounding Allen Robinson.
Well,
yeah, and I'll link that piece in the show notes. That one is like, I'm not saying that the Vikings will sign Allen Robinson or even that he is a reasonable target. The whole premise of that piece is just the Vikings can move around enough money and make enough moves that they could probably sign an impact free agent and then sign a bunch of like $2 million people at all the other positions in need and then draft and hopefully get lucky. If they did that, who would the impact free agents be? And I listed 5 of them, and Al Robinson was one of them. So I want to make it clear, like, I don't really expect this reality to come to fruition, although it would be kind of fun as hell if it did, just because like the Vikings doing crazy stuff is like good for me.
it does cause a number of words to appear on paper.
Yeah.
That we really do need to have more Life of Brian references in this show, apparently. I knew it was coming, and I still was unprepared. Tampa Bay Vipers for Life, your other favorite Twitter account handle.
Yeah, we're nailing them today.
Are any of the free agent wideouts a viable third option for the Vikings, or would they be better off drafting someone else?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot. So I'm going to link this piece too. So before I published that piece about potential splash signings, I published a piece about like reasonable free agent targets, and I listed a bunch of needs, and I highlighted the free agent that I liked the most among the ones that seemed like reasonable targets. And this one also gets to answer the other question about this in the mailbag that we have, which was sent by Dilla, who is a really great account. He's a friend of mine. He's also like a Jaguars insider, so sometimes he'll like break news. I mean, most of the time he's just like posting whatever he wants, right? Because he's not like a football writer. But like sometimes he'll just like break Jaguars news, and it's correct. But he asked, with the addition of Keenan McCardell to the coaching staff, do you think the Vikings will target Keelan Cole in free agency, assuming he becomes a free agent? And yeah, assuming he becomes a free agent, I don't think that he or DJ Chark or Dede Westbrook are going to be franchised, but they could re-sign him or whatever, right? And I identified all 3 of those as potential wide receiver 3 targets for the Vikings, and I think that they'd be really great fits. And it turns out that Keelan Cole is actually the one that I want out of all of those 3 because he's also a returner, and I think he just kind of fits the Vikings a little bit better. He's a little bit actually, I shouldn't say he's a little bit younger. They're all kind of 27, 28. They're all a little bit older for first contract guys. But I think that signing someone who has proven to be like an 800-yard receiver and making him the third receiver is just smart, because I don't think you can like count on yourself to hit in the draft again. Like if you go over the Vikings' history of drafting wide receivers, I mean, it's not awful, right? Because you've got like Percy Harvin and Stephon Diggs in there, right? But you've also got Cordell Patterson, Laquan Treadwell, and then you've got a slew of 4th rounders, which like Jarius Wright, he'd be a great third receiver to have if they drafted him in the 4th round. But they also like drafted Greg Childs, right? And his knees blew up. They drafted like Stacy Coley and the other returner from that year. They drafted KJ Osborne, Rodney Adams. That's what I'm thinking of. It's not. I wouldn't say that like even if they drafted 2 receivers, that they should be comfortable at wide receiver 3. Like BC Johnson was like a pretty good get for a 7th rounder, but like you first, he's vastly outperformed most 7th round receivers, and second, he's not even a quality wide receiver 3 at this point based on the information that we have. Hopefully he gets better. I think that he's got that kind of talent, but at the moment he's not delivered on that expectation. So I think the Vikings absolutely need to make a signing, and sometimes the signings don't work out, right? Like Kendall Wright didn't work out, Michael Floyd didn't work out, Michael Jenkins didn't work out, Jerome Simpson didn't work out. Like a lot of these signings, Michael Wallace didn't work out. A lot of these signings that are relatively cheap and not huge splash free agents don't necessarily work out. But I think that you need to take a couple of shots here because I think that third wide receiver position is important.
Yeah, I was waiting for you to say Greg Jennings also didn't work out.
That absolutely worked out. He was always open.
It was really weird that they never got him the ball. But,
yeah, it was very bizarre. And then cutting him, that was the weirdest part.
Indeed. Josh Wells asks, for Arif and James's cryptic social media comment corner, that's sure. A new one. Is there truth to all rumors, or to any of the rumors, about Barr being against restructure talks? Harrison Smith extension forthcoming, potential Reef extension. Feel free to add any others floating around the Twitter sphere that I may have missed.
So, 2 years ago, I think someone called me a Big J journalist, and it was an insult. And I think it was an argument that like it wasn't even about football. It was like about how I'm sure it had something to do with like Trump and fake news or whatever, right? But this is the first time I've really felt it. Like, oh, I'm so out of touch with like Vikings Twitter and the blogosphere. I have not seen any of these rumors. Like I have not seen a single tweet about Barr being against restructure talks. I've not seen a single tweet about Harrison Smith extension forthcoming. I've not seen a single tweet indicating that there's some likelihood that there's going to be a potential Riley Reef extension. I've not seen any of those. That said, the way I do journalism does not involve mining sources for predictions about what, or not even predictions, statements about what the Vikings will or won't do. That's like something that's, Chad Graff handles that over at The Athletic a lot better than I do. Ben Gessling over the Star Tribune does that. Courtney Cronin does it. Matthew Collar does it. I'm not very good at that. I don't do that. So I can't even tell you, but based off of my reading of what those people have published and what I've read, I would doubt that Barr's against restructure talks. I could see a Harrison Smith extension, but I think that would be unwise. And I think that I would say that is below 50%, but probably above 10%. And then a Riley Reef extension, that makes some sense too. I just don't, I don't think that that's necessarily in the cards based off of the way that the Vikings and Riley Reef have interacted. Not that that's like, not like, that's determinative, right? Because the Vikings have been in conflict with both players and coaches that I thought because of that conflict they would part ways as soon as the contract was up, and they have decided on an extension or whatever, right? Which is part of the reason I don't tend to, when I find out about a conflict between a coach and the executives or a player and the executives, I don't always talk about it because I don't know if it means anything. And in some cases it doesn't, right? And so sometimes they turn into it. But given that Riley Reef was almost dismissed last year to make room for Yannick Ngakoue, I would be surprised. I think that one's below 50% as well. I don't know any other rumors floating around the Twitter sphere. I guess, it's not even a rumor that Kyle Rudolph basically wants out. I don't have anything to add. So sorry, I don't have much for the cryptic social media comment corner. I'm old and out of touch and too much of an elite blue check to know what the people are saying.
There you go. Well, admitting it is the first step in solving the problem.
Right.
I admittedly had heard the Anthony Barr thing, but I hadn't seen it like actually reported by anyone of any like real note.
That would explain why Luke Braun, who ended up asking another question in the mailbag, which we'll get to later. Luke Braun retweeted his story about how valuable Anthony Barr is. Like, I just thought he was like starting a discussion, which like fine, whatever. But like, it adds more to the context to that.
Slightly, yeah. Strawwet asks, do you think the defense could make a comeback when Hunter returns? Should we be worried or hopeful with the young cornerback situation?
So I think that the defense could make a comeback. I think the defense overperformed the level of talent that they had this last year, which I understand can seem very weird, but like the defense just did not have a ton of talent. That defense played a lot better, or at least gave up fewer points than one would expect given the amount of talent that they showed on the field. You had Anthony Barr for like 2 games. You had Eric Kendricks for 11 games. And despite that, and not having Danielle Hunter at all, not having a nose tackle at all, despite that, the defense was not like a bottom half defense. So I think that because of Zimmer, and this isn't a defense of Zimmer as a head coach or anything like that. I think that you can admit that this is true and still be against the extension of Mike Zimmer or anything like that. But I think because of Zimmer, you're always going to have some level of defensive performance beyond average. And so, yeah, I think that when you get a talent like Hunter back, when you get Michael Pierce into the fold, and you get another year with Cameron Dantzler and Jeff Gladney and that group, there's a pretty good chance it'll get better. So I think you should be hopeful with the young cornerback situation. To answer the second part of that question, Dantzler, the second half of the year, Dantzler played really well. He played like the best rookie corner, depending on whether or not you're calling Antoine Winfield a corner or safety. He played really well. Like him and AJ Terrell were really up there. And so I would be pretty hopeful about that. Jeff Gladney, I thought played decently well. I think so. We've got another question about Ezra Cleveland coming up in a bit. I think Pro Football Focus overrates Ezra Cleveland's level of play this year or last year, and underrated Jeff Gladney's level of play. That's not to say that Gladney was like lights out or anything like that. Obviously, Dantzler was a much better corner and Gladney struggled, but I think for the most part, we saw positive signs from him. So I'm hopeful. I still think they need to add another cornerback. I think what you get Chris Boyd back, and with another year in the system, he's going to help a little bit, but I think you need to add another corner because it helps if Jeff Gladney gets to focus on one position, whether that's the inside or the outside. I don't know, but I think you need to add another corner, but I think you should be hopeful. And I think that defense is probably going to be top 10. There's a chance it could be top 5, depending on how they nail the draft.
Raul asks, the Colts and Eagles continue to exchange each other's players and coaches. What are the 2 worst teams you could combine to form next year's Super Bowl favorite?
God, I wish I saw this in pre-show. I was too busy looking up like a question 2 questions down, and I missed this. The 2 worst teams that you could combine to form next year's Super Bowl favorite. Well, God, the Eagles are really great. That's good. I like that.
That's to the bone. That's organization.
Yeah. Let's see. Is there anybody from the Jets? Like, it's just like Mekhi Becton and CJ. Well, not even CJ Mosley. Like the safeties, Marcus May and Ashton, whatever his name is. Yeah, I don't think you could do the Jets. I don't think you could do the Bengals, even if you took Joe Burrow.
No, you'd have to. I think the lowest level you could probably hit would be the
Falcons.
What about? Hold on, hold that thought. Falcons, Dolphins.
The Dolphins ended up winning 10 games. Is the problem?
Did they? Right?
Right? Like, did Brian Flores win Coach of the Year? Who won Coach of the Year?
I'm not calling you a liar. I am literally Googling this right now. Record 2021. I'm really 10 wins, huh? I was wrong. 10-6.
Yeah, because the Coach of the Year candidates were Kevin Stefanski and Brian Flores. That team should not have won 10 games. But like, let's say that team was. There's no way we can call them one of the worst teams in the NFL last year. We just can't.
No.
Yeah. So if we do that, if we restrict ourselves to the worst teams by record, let's say, I think you get the Atlanta Falcons in there. That's one of the 2 teams. That way you get a phenomenal receiving core with Calvin Ridley, Julio Jones. You've got some good offensive linemen with like Jake Matthews and potentially Chris Lindstrom. Obviously, you've got Matt Ryan as a quarterback who I think in the right environment can turn back into another MVP season. So that's part of it. And then you've got some pieces on defense, Deion Jones and Grady Jarrett and AJ Terrell, like I just said. Maybe Keanu Neal in the right system. So then probably that and the 49ers. Holy crap.
Be like
Done.
either the 49ers or the Patriots.
Yeah, and the 49ers are one win worse than the Patriots. So we'll take them, right? Because then you end up with a team that is 10 wins and 22 losses. So you're well below 500. You get the rest of that offensive line figured out. You've got a great running back group. Not that that matters too much. You've got some really good corners, assuming that we're not like taking into account free agency and people leaving in free agency. You got Richard Sherman and Jason Verrett. You've got Keanu Neal working with like Jimmy Ward back there. And now Deion Jones gets to work with Fred Warner, and now you don't have to rely on Quan Alexander, who I think is a little bit overrated. You've got Eric Armstead with Grady Jarrett. Holy crap, that's a really good team. Oh my god!
Wow, there is an interesting proposal.
Yeah, can you create a team with fewer wins in 2020? To dominate 2021. I guess you could start with Houston, right? And you get Deshaun Watson, so you get a better quarterback.
He'd have to want to show up.
Yeah, well, but like if we're not counting the free agency exits that San Francisco gets, right? Because Jason Verrett and Richard Sherman are both free agents, right? So if we're not counting that, Deshaun Watson did play for Houston last year, so we can do that. And you get that, and then I don't know, Will Fuller, I guess. I mean, okay,
Randall. I think Cobb? I was going to say Randall Cobb. I was literally about to say Randall Cobb was a receiver on that offense.
Yeah, so you get like Laramie Tunsil and yeah, I think the 49ers have to be part of this because the rest of that team is so good. So you throw Deshaun Watson and Matt Ryan on that team, and it becomes really stunningly good. And the fact that I might lean Atlanta just because of that receiving core and the way they complement each other to fill out that roster. Whereas Houston, like, okay, you get JJ Watt because we're counting last year, and you get to pair him with Eric Armstead, and that's good. But I think I might rather have Grady Jarrett to pair with Eric Armstead, and maybe. And even though, again, Deshaun Watson's much better than Matt Ryan, that team doesn't have any receivers, right? It's Will Fuller and Brandon Ayuk, like, and Deebo Samuel, I guess. Like, great. But I'd rather have Matt Ryan and like if Brandon Ayuk is my fourth best or maybe even fifth, depending on what you think of Olamide Zaccheaus. But it's like Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones. Like, I mean, that's such a good. I think it's Atlanta 49ers, but you might convince me of Houston 49ers.
I was just thinking about Houston and Carolina for a second there because Carolina won one game more than Atlanta did last year.
Oh yeah. Well, I think that one game makes it a tough.
Yeah.
Well, if it's Houston and Carolina, that's 9 total wins versus Atlanta and San Francisco, which is 10. And Carolina has really good receivers, like really good, like Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore. Like, do they have an offensive? They've got Laramie Tunsil and Taylor Moton, and they might have an offensive line too. That defense is really suspect, though, like crazy suspect.
Yeah, and you're not going to get any help from the defense of Houston,
right? Yeah, you get JJ Watt, which we know is not enough by its own to hold the defense,
as was evidenced by the play of the 2020 Texans last year.
Yeah.
Let's go to Alexander, who asks, "Are there any cool Vikings/Minnesotan relations to draft eligible players this year? I know Rick Spielman's son, JD Spielman, is in this year's draft. Do you think it's possible for him to end up in purple and gold, and would you advocate for it?"
JD Spielman's a pretty good returner, so I think that, like, in a vacuum, he'd offer a lot. I probably would advocate for it. I think that would not be like an instance where a team is going to be too beholden to holding on to a player just because the dad is the GM, because I think that that's a situation where a team would make sure that particular decision was out of Rick Spielman's hands. Like, now I'm just thinking of, like, I can't operate on you. You're my son. Like, you know the joke. I think they would probably take that decision out of his hands. I think that they'd be able to handle that well enough. That was also a question when Khalil McKenzie was in the draft. Like, Reggie McKenzie was the GM for the Raiders, and some people were asking about that. He ended up with I think the Chiefs at the time. So That didn't end up becoming a big deal, but I think it's probably fine. As for any other Vikings/Minnesota relations to draft eligible players this year, aside from the Gophers, I don't know. I'm sure somebody can like email in and tell me that like I forgot like the
you're out of touch. You're one of those blue checks that doesn't listen in on the plebs.
Right. Yeah, so you're gonna have to talk to Alexander directly because I'm not gonna read your email. Whoever is correct about this that I don't know.
There you go. This person who may or may not exist.
Yeah.
The dog Eddie Crane has 2 questions for Arif. Number 1, would selecting a wide receiver at 14 have a substantially diminished return in 2021, given Kirk's struggles to produce outside of play structure?
I don't think so. Like, I think that the third receiver in an offense does not see targets as a result of a quarterback extending the play, or not primarily receive targets as a result of the quarterback extending the play and seeing a play break down and kind of improvising. The way that a lot of progressions work, they don't necessarily go like my first read is closed, my second read is closed, I'll go to my third read. Very often the progression will be a product of you identifying the defense and then determining kind of what side of the field or what route combination does the best job of attacking that defense. So you don't know what your first read is after you call the play sometimes. You have to know kind of, is it too high? Is it single high? Is the safety spinning down? Is it a blitz? Whatever. Your first read might change based off of what the defense does. And so adding a third wide receiver who would, in theory, be the third most likely option the Vikings would throw to on any particular play would not mean that the only way that third receiver would see targets is a product of a play breaking down. It could be that you get a guy that's really good in the slot, which might be a waste given how good Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson are in the slot. But say you get a guy that's good in the slot, if Kirk, for whatever reason, sees a lot of blitzes this year, and that person's in the slot, and the Vikings running a lot of 3 wide receivers, he might just go to the slot guy as the hot route. Like that might be what's designated as the hot route. A guy whose job is to fill in the space that was left open by the blitz. In which case, that's not a product of Kirk not being able to improvise. That's a product of a post-snap read. It's not like him scrambling or anything like that. So, no, I don't think so. And I think there's actually a justifiable reason to select a wide receiver at 14. I think it would probably make a couple of people upset, probably not as many just because of the success of drafting wide receiver last year. And I understand the argument because you're, quote unquote, set at receiver. But I think there's a couple of good arguments for doing it. I don't think that the 2021 product would be diminished because of the outside of structure problems that Kirk Cousins has. I think, the 2021 return is going to be diminished just because they're going to be the third option. Just generally, you're going to design plays away from them. But so you're not going to see a huge return. But I still think that there's a bunch of reasons that you might want to do it. And I don't think that any limitation of the targets would be a product of Kirk not being able to improvise. Like, I think that's just not really how one would design an offense to accommodate a third receiver.
The other question from the dog Eddie Crane is, for Arif's beekeeping corner, one of my 2 beehives did not survive the deep winter freeze. While Arif clearly failed in giving me adequate advice on insulating them, it does give me the opportunity to try a new breed of bee when I order another package for spring. Both the deceased and surviving hives are an Italian variety. Should I stick with the same kind or try a new breed of honeybee this year? Thank you.
Okay, first of all, clearly my advice worked because one of the hives did survive a deep freeze. That's incredible. You're welcome.
Second, you're batting 500 there, I suppose.
I mean, like, what is the normal survival rate for bees surviving a deep freeze? Probably lower than 500. So I'm doing pretty well here. My bees above replacement are outstanding. Okay, so now that that's out of the way, I went to my beekeeping community, beesource.com, to see the trusted experts at beesource.com to see what the community thinks. Obviously, as a an apiary enthusiast, I obviously have my own thoughts, but I wanted to check it against the community of experts that they have there. And boy, did I find out some interesting stuff. Did you know that they call the different breeds of bees in the beekeeping community races?
I did know that, oddly enough, yes.
There's nothing like inherently wrong with that, except it creates like these really weird sentences.
Like,
I'm just going to read off a bunch of sentences for you, James.
Okay. All right.
I have Italians and Carnies in the same yard. The difference in races can cause problems. I found this out my first year if you don't pay close attention. For example, Italians don't typically shut down brood rearing during a summer dearth. They could burn up all their stores, and come fall, and as far as colony size, they could be quite ahead of the Carney colony that slowed or stopped laying during the dearth, which can lead to the larger colony trying to rob the smaller one. So keep this in mind that, if you've got that one colony can rob another colony.
Oh, Jesus. Yeah, there's. It sounds like a race war at this point.
This gets way better, dude. Here's another forum comment. Italian bees are born robbers. It's the first sentence of this comment. Italian bees are born robbers. Carniolan bees aren't bad for robbing. Russian bees aren't bad either. I have both Italian and Russian bees. Italians are constantly trying to rob the Russians, but don't get very far while doing so. However, the Carniolan bees are easy targets and have to be moved from time to time, and entry shut down to 1 bee entry. This is so good. There's my favorite sentences in here. The serious answer, this is a different comment. This is 9 comments down. The serious answer is that bees are not racists like some people.
That's just an awesome sentence to say. I feel like that is said on Twitter like 18 times a day.
The reality is bees are not racists like some people. There's one sentence. Italians are well known to be robbers, or aside from the Italians' tendency to rob, like, oh my God. It's agreed apparently on this forum that Italian bees, I want to be very clear, bees are much more likely to seek resources that already exist in another beehive. I don't want to talk about property rights and bees and stuff, but like, they're much more likely to like not care that this is another bees colony, evidently, according to this forum. They also, there was another forum. It's not this one, but I saw the phrase "race mixing is inevitable," and I. So, yeah. Okay. So that after reading this forum and like finding a way to get over these like sentences, which in reality is getting over myself. I mean, this is just how this community talks, right? But like, I mean, these are like gems if you've never been into beekeeping. I imagine, as someone who's been into beekeeping for years, I imagine that someone who's not been into beekeeping would find these great. But
we all, regardless, we all learned something today, whether we wanted to or not.
The advice that I can give is that now that you've had a year of beekeeping under your belt with 2 of the same type of bees, Italians, and you can kind of get a good gauge for how those bees act and what's kind of within their normal range of behavior and what's not within the normal range of behavior, it would make sense to expand to another breed of bee. If you do that, you just kind of need to be careful. Some of the recommendations here are there's something called robber screens that'll prevent other bees from getting into the wrong hive. There's screens for entrances so that you can reduce the entrances to just a 1 bee entry at a time, which keeps, especially for a smaller colony, being protected from a larger colony. You can do that. Or you can do kind of a hive management to time feedings properly so that one colony doesn't get too large in relation to the other colony, so you can keep the colony sizes fairly equal. But for the most part, this is a small challenge, but it is not one that is insurmountable. A lot of apiarists have a mixture of bee types, and sometimes they'll go through, I guess it's called a breeding dearth, where they're just going to they're going to reproduce a little bit less during the summer at some point. And they might hit those cycles at different times, so you have to practice hive management. And you, now having a year of experience under your belt, will know what that looks like, presumably. You can sometimes, if one colony ends up without a queen, you can sometimes transport broods to a queenless colony, and sometimes that'll work out, sometimes it won't. But having multiple colonies is really rewarding. So that's my answer about the bee races.
about the potentials for bee race wars. The entire time you were speaking, I had the game Sim Ant going in my head in some variety. So I'm just just dealing with all of this at this point. I
aside from the Italian tendency to rob, as stated many times above.
God. Let's go to Bill Bodke to get us away from the beekeeping corner. Bill Bodke asks, every year our Reef puts together a consensus big board for the NFL draft and does a big story on the biggest disagreements between forecasters and evaluators. Looking back at the 2020 season, are there any trends here that stand out to you? For example, evaluators were much higher on Antoine Winfield Jr. and Donovan Peoples-Jones than the forecasters, and the evaluators won that battle.
Yeah, so I'm taking a look at the differences here, and it doesn't seem like there's a clear trend. Like you mentioned, the Donovan Peoples-Jones was somebody that evaluators were much higher on, and obviously that kind of worked out. Antoine Winfield, another player that evaluators were much higher on, that worked out. But you take a look at kind of the aggregate, and I don't know that there's a ton here. Maybe the next best hit for the evaluators is Alex Highsmith. Evaluators ranked him 117th, forecasters 187th. And for people unfamiliar, I should not just dive into it right away. For people unfamiliar, so every year I pulled together anywhere between 40 and 60 big boards from various draft communities or analysts, like people like Dan Brugler over at The Athletic and Trapasso at CBS and all the different big boards produced by the Draft Network and so on, and put them all together, and I categorized them into two categories. So there's the forecasters, people who have a lot of contact with the NFL, have a lot of sources from which they can get a bunch of information, and that information can include injury information, character information, as well as information about how various NFL scouts see certain players. And so I call those forecasters because they tend to do a better job of predicting how the draft will go. And then a much larger group of people I call evaluators, because the only way that they can construct their board is just by evaluating the broadcast footage. And so and now we've got access to all 22, but just by evaluating the footage and not having as much in the way of sources within NFL teams that provide you with access to scouts and stuff like that. And so I call those evaluators because that's the only thing that they can do. And so it tends to be kind of big media versus small media. That's a lot less true now because there are some evaluators that work at big media. For example, at CBS, Chris Trapasso doesn't have the same approach to evaluation that Dan Brugler did when he was at CBS and now is obviously with The Athletic. But Mel Kiper, for example, and Todd McShay both have contacts with teams, and so they're put into the forecast report. So with all of that in mind, I don't know that there's something definitive in favor of the forecasters or the evaluators. So Ezra Cleveland, for example, was one of the biggest disagreements between the two, and forecasters were higher on Ezra Cleveland than evaluators were. Right now, to me, it seems like evaluators were more correct, but I think that there's a lot of room for disagreement and interpretation there. Christian Fulton, evaluators were much higher on him than forecasters were. Seems like, that might be, forecasters might be closer to correct on that. Jonah Jackson played reasonably well. Evaluators had him 92, forecasters had him 165. So I would say evaluators probably got that correct. But some of these players, we didn't get a ton of, like Natani Muti from Fresno State. We don't have a ton of information. Evaluators are much higher than forecasters. That's probably an injury thing. Tyler Johnson, evaluators were way higher on him than forecasters. That's something that we'll have to see as it plays out. But right now, it seems like forecasters were more likely to be correct on that. I mean, and we'll see. Like Albert O or Albert Aquabunum, the forecasters liked more, and it seems at the moment that the forecasters are probably correct. I mean, he had a pretty good showing for his limited sample, which was nice to see. So I would say that if I'm leaning one way or the other, right? Like CeeDee Lamb was somebody that the evaluators liked more, while Jerry Jeudy was liked by the forecasters more. If I'm leaning one way or the other, I would say the evaluators are probably correct year one. We're not going to know for a couple of years, which is fine. I was taking a look at the 2019 consensus big board, so the 2019, who the biggest disagreements were, and the evaluators and the forecasters, and we've got a little bit of a better picture there. So the biggest disagreement, let's see if I can take a look at this, was Kendall Sheffield, a cornerback from Ohio State. The forecasters liked him a lot more. That seems to be, kind of in line with the forecasters. But the second biggest disagreement was Brian Burns. The evaluators liked him a lot more, and I feel like they're closer to correct on that one. Rashawn Gary is kind of an interesting one because his first year was pretty bad. His second year, the second half of this last season was pretty good. And if that turns out to be the case, then forecasters were closer to correct on him. They ranked him 7th, while evaluators ranked him 16th. Jarrett Stidham, the evaluators liked a lot less. It seems like they might be right because the Patriots were just much more comfortable with Cam Newton. Hakeem Butler is one that I think the evaluators probably got wrong. The forecasters had him at 65. The evaluators had him at 35. I know some people had him as like wide receiver 1. Jamel Dean is somebody that the forecasters liked a lot more, had him at 88, while the evaluators had him at 120. It seems like for the most part for 2019 that the forecasters were closer to correct about the overall prospect outcome than evaluators. So if 2020 demonstrates some level of preference for the evaluators, I think 2019 makes a much stronger case for the forecasters. Overall, I found that no one group of evaluators or no one group of big boards tends to be more correct in the long run, which to me is super interesting because one is much more correct about predicting draft position, but neither are more correct about predicting player outcomes, which to me means that evaluators are being undervalued by the NFL draft. So whatever information that the NFL is getting about these players, they seem to be overprivileging. They seem to care a little bit too much about injury or about kind of, what their coaches are telling them or about off-field character or something. So that seems to be the case because if they're evaluating at about the same rate, if they're predicting player outcomes at the same rate, but one is predicting draft order a little bit better, then there probably needs to be some correction and it probably needs to land in between the two. So I find that interesting. But at the moment, the 2020 stuff seems to favor the evaluators.
Next question is going to be from Sylvan, who asks, in recent shows, Arif has sounded much less enthusiastic about Ezra Cleveland than the other analysts are. Why is that? Should we be looking for a position switch, another guard, or just someone better than Ezra?
Oh, come on. I'll allow it.
Yeah.
I'll say, okay, so my issue is that he seems to just be, he doesn't seem to be sustaining blocks as long as he needs to, as long as kind of the average player needs to in the situations he's been in. And he tends to get tricked by defensive tackles with really good hand fighting technique. And so he can be caught lunging and stuff like that. And I found that Dalvin Cook in particular has made him look a lot better than he is. And so without, quote unquote, forcing a missed tackle in the way that you would chart it, let's say by PFF, Cook has done a good job of avoiding the backfield pressure that Ezra Cleveland is allowing, at least to me. And so I think that there's a lot of issues with the way Ezra Cleveland is playing that are not necessarily showing up as pressures, but to me show up as pass rush losses or a lot of situations that are not tackles for loss, but only because Dalvin Cook did a good job of avoiding it. And so that's my issue. And I think that PFF's grade of him is probably defensible. Some of the plays that I didn't like are not necessarily plays that impacted the outcome. So I can kind of understand it. But I just don't think that he's played very well. I think that he's done a pretty poor job of keeping his chest clean and sustaining blocks as long as he needs to and staying in the right position. With that said, I think part of this is just because he's been made into a guard, and I think he's a natural tackle. I think that he should play tackle. And so we should probably be looking for a position switch for him if Riley Reiff is no longer going to be on the team. If he is on the team, I'd much rather play him just because he had a really great year last year. But no matter what, they should be looking for a guard to push that spot. And so whether that's there's not many good mid-range guards in free agency. You've got the two at the top, Sheriff and Thuney, and then you've got a bunch at the bottom that you don't really love, like Brian Winters, for example. I'm not like super into, but he has a Rick Dennison connection. Maybe you could like convince Ty Nsekhe to play guard. I don't know, but I don't think that there's a ton of guard options in the market. But I think that you should at least try to create some competition there. And bring in a player, the third, fourth round of the draft, maybe the second round of the draft if you trade back into it. So, I'm that's correct. I'm not that enthusiastic about Cleveland. I think it is defensible to be enthusiastic about Cleveland. I don't necessarily act that way on Twitter. I kind of just I can't believe you think Cleveland played well last year. I get it though. But I just don't think that he played all that well or in a way that's sustainable and leads to future good play. I'd love to be wrong about that.
Luke Braun asks, would love to hear Reiff's own answer to this. If you made Barr into a league average pass rusher and teams knew it, what would his true value in cap dollars become? And how far are both, quote, true values from what he actually makes?
Yeah, so Luke had this pretty good article, which I'll link in the show notes, about what Anthony Barr does and why we should probably be a little bit more generous to him in terms of the way that we talk about him and how, and this is a take that I've had and talked about a couple of times. He's unique. He makes the Mike Zimmer defense operate the way it does, at least in terms of fronts. And that it has a lot to do with his ability to force one-on-one matchups as a potential pass. He doesn't even have to rush the passer. He has to appear to threaten to rush the passer. And so his ability to do that creates unique pass rush opportunities where there aren't really that many double teams because he can't be blocked by running backs all that well or even tight ends all that well, especially when he's blitzing up the A-gap. Running backs just do a very poor job of handling him. So with that in mind, if he was a league average pass rusher, he probably wouldn't do that, right? So one of the things that Luke points out in this piece is that teams that adjust to Anthony Barr adjust by finding a way to put an offensive lineman on him in pass rush. Sometimes that lineman is blocking air because he's not actually rushing the passer. He just appears to be doing that. But if you leave a linebacker or if you leave a running back on him, you're probably just going to get eaten alive. And that causes a lot of pressure. So that leaves you to kind of create pass rush lanes, essentially, for all the other players. So if we got rid of that, if he was an average pass rusher and you could block him with a running back, then where do you have him? Well, I would say you'd pay him above the average salary of a linebacker. I think as a traditional linebacker, he is better than average. And I think that a lot of Vikings fans, they obviously strongly disagree with that characterization. But just seeing how all of the other linebackers, whether that was Eric Wilson or Todd Davis or Ryan Connolly or Troy Dye, all of them attempt to fill in for Anthony Barr at different points, and seeing kind of the difference in play. I mean, that was huge, right? What did Luke said that he had at least 41 run stops in each of the last 3 years before this last year, which is pretty difficult to do. And run stops are different than tackles. They're stops that constitute a loss for the offense, and so they're they should probably be tackles that are negative expected points, but then that would inflate the stop total. It's stops that on first down prevented the offense from going at least 40% of the required yardage to convert. On second down, at least 60% of the yardage, and on third and fourth down, 100% of the yardage. So you could conceivably get a run stop after like a 10-yard run. If it was like on third down and it was 3rd and 12 or something like that. But, for the most part, it does a really good job of tallying valuable tackles while ignoring all these tackles that occur way after the play is over. And he tends to be well above league average in that total. And then also in run stop rate, he does all right when you turn it into a rate statistic. How does he stack up as a linebacker? I think that he's above average, and an average starting linebacker probably makes around, I want to say about $7 million, which I think really reveals how underpaid Eric Kendricks is. Eric Kendricks is paid $10 million in average. He had a $50 million deal for 5 years. As soon as he signed it, he was underpaid. But it was for an off-ball linebacker closer to the top of the market at the time, kind of. But now we've got Bobby Wagner making 18. CJ Mosley makes 17 million. Obviously, Anthony Barr makes 13.5 million, which is about like fifth, sixth in the league, or at the time it was. Since then, we've had a couple of new deals kind of break that, but that is a significant inflation in linebacker value at a position that traditionally you don't really break above. You don't get close to pass rusher money. Like $18 million what Bobby Wagner's getting paid, that's pass rusher money, and you just don't get there. 10 million seems to be kind of a ceiling that a lot of teams have hit for their top end linebackers. And Eric Kendricks is much better than most teams' top end linebackers. So he, I think, is underpaid. So an average linebacker, probably around 7 million. And I would say that Anthony Barr as an average pass rusher is probably closer to 9 million. So long as we understand that Eric Kendricks is probably closer to 12. So now that we know that he is probably an $8-9 million linebacker with an average pass rush capability, does his pass rush capability, his ability to create one-on-one pass rushing lanes on pass rushing downs that he shows that he's going to rush the passer, does that add $4 million a year in value? And I would say no, I don't think it does. I think that the value of one-on-one pass rushing lanes is pretty good, but I think it's easy to overrate. Because pass rush is just a lot less significant in outcomes than we tend to think it is. Getting pressure on a quarterback is obviously good. The passer rating drops by like 40 points. Like it goes from like 100 to 60 if they're in a clean pocket, a 100 passer rating quarterback. That's really valuable. But the difference in pass rush performance is usually like a really good team gets pressure on like 40%, I should say 40% of downs. And a poor team gets it on like 25% of downs. And that's your range of pass rush pressure outcomes. And teams can control it. Offenses can control it by getting rid of the ball quicker. And that doesn't show up in the statistic about whether or not your passer rating drops 40 points because the pressure never arrived. And so it's much easier to mitigate pressure than a lot of people think. And I think it's a little bit overrated, the ability to create one-on-one pass rushing lanes. And again, I think that this is something Vikings fans should take into account when evaluating Anthony Barr. But I think it's easy to overrate. And I think that, for example, like Danielle Hunter is always going to get double teamed or he's going to get pressure. Like that's kind of just who he is. That's going to happen either way. And I think that the extra offensive lineman will typically be taken up by the nose tackle anyway, by Michael Pierce in this scenario, or Linval Joseph in previous years. And Linval Joseph getting a one-on-one was valuable in the past, but it's not that valuable anymore. Now that it's Michael Pierce, I don't think it's going to be that valuable. He doesn't even do that great in pass rushing situations and one-on-ones. So I don't think it's $4 million more. I do think it's more than the current paid out value of Eric Kendricks, but I don't think it is $13.5 million. I'd say probably $11 million, which is a $2 million difference. So it's not significant or huge. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's not even that. But I would say that Anthony Barr is underrated by fans and overpaid by the Vikings, and both things can be true.
Next question is from Andrew Shad, who asks, how much does BPA and positional needs lining up have to do with draft success. Who has gotten the luckiest with this in recent years, and which teams are likely to have these factors coincide in this year's draft?
Well, the Chiefs have gotten the luckiest, right? um, I think that the Saints draft in 2017 is a really good example of BPA and needs just lining up perfectly. I think that they generally took the best player available, especially when they took obviously Michael Thomas and Marcus Williams, but also with Marshawn Lattimore. And those happen to be the team needs that they had as well. So that's probably the best example. The biggest example is Patrick Mahomes, obviously. Um, I mean, teams seem to be moving around in the draft a little bit more, and fewer teams are trading up into the top 10 for non-quarterbacks than before, but otherwise, they seem to be kind of moving around a little bit better. So it is a little bit difficult to get a good read on which teams are doing a good job of aligning value and positional need. This is something the Vikings used to be really good at, and I think are still generally pretty good at. They kind of got burned the year they drafted Mike Hughes because I think that they expected more guards to be available when they ended up drafting Brian O'Neill. That ended up turning out fine because he turned out to be a really good right tackle. So it kind of doesn't matter. But for the most part, the Vikings have done a really good job of maneuvering at the point in the draft where the best player available or something like it matches their positional need pretty well. So I would say the Vikings are actually a pretty decent example of that. The 2015 draft is obviously a very good example of that. Yeah, I mean, teams tend to draft by need a lot more than you'd think. They say they always want to take the best player available, but it is very clear that teams draft by need. And so the teams that have had good drafts also are probably teams that do a pretty good job of lining up positional need and BPA. I would say that that's true for the Vikings this year as well, or this last year as well. That Justin Jefferson was the best player on the board, bar none. And the fact that the Vikings needed a receiver after trading Diggs was a very happy coincidence. That Cameron Dantzler was there at the top of the third. From my understanding, the Vikings might have had him as like a. So my understanding is the Vikings thought of him potentially as a first round guy, but were really, really worried about his combine performance and not just his speed, because he ran like a 4.6 at the combine, but also like his size, like his weight was a big problem. And when he ran the 4.3 at whatever size he was at the virtual pro day, they were a little bit more comfortable, but he fell a little bit. So that he was probably the best. He was probably the top overall player on the board when they took him in the third round as well. Again, we expected the Vikings to take multiple cornerbacks in this draft, and so that was a need as well. So I would say that this year was also, or this last year was also a good example of that. I don't know which team has gotten the luckiest. I still think probably the Saints are probably the best example, but the Chiefs have gotten the luckiest with the biggest hit. I think the Vikings have gotten the luckiest most recently. I think the Saints got the luckiest probably overall within the last 4 or 5 years. And which teams are likely to have those factors coincide in this year's draft? I haven't done a very good job of evaluating team needs, so I can't really answer that super well this year because I don't know which teams need what and where those needs are in the draft. I think that the Cardinals are pretty well positioned now that they're probably not going to take an edge rusher to just kind of go BPA for the entire draft and come out with a pretty good crop. Like I think, for example, they'll probably end up with a pretty reasonably good offensive lineman in the round one if that's the direction they go in. They could get a really good receiver in round two and a pretty decent linebacker in round three, based off of my understanding of how good this draft is. So the Cardinals might be in that scenario if we exclude, obviously, quarterbacks. Even if we include quarterbacks, I mean, the Jets are probably in a pretty good scenario just because they've got so many needs that they can use that 23rd pick for a lot of stuff. Let's see, who else is like in the middle of the draft that's got like a pretty good. I mean, it kind of if Kwity Paye drops to the Vikings, I think that would be a really phenomenal example of that, and they take him obviously, but we can't really know. I think I'm not a huge fan of Gregory Rousseau. I do like the Georgia guy, Azeez Ojulari. I think he's probably a mid first round guy right now. He's getting mocked around the 20s. I think he's probably talented enough to be picked at like 14, maybe. That's like pretty outside of his current mock draft pick range, so that's a somewhat bold decision. But I like him a lot, and I think that he could be that good. But Kwity Paye and Azeez Ojulari are probably the two I take there. I don't love Gregory Rousseau. I don't really love the other edge rushers there. I like Rashawn Slater. I don't know how I feel about some of these other offensive linemen. But I think the Vikings could probably be that, except it's tough to say that without a second round pick. So we'll see kind of how the bottom of the third or fourth rounds go for them.
Next question is from Kyle Slaby, who asks, for a Reefs vibes corner, which first round talent gives you the most Minnesota Viking vibes?
So Kwity Paye fits the Vikings like to a T in terms of like the athletic profile, the fact that he's more an athlete than someone. I mean, and it's not that he didn't produce; he obviously was fairly productive at Michigan. But I think it's fair to say that his athleticism is a little bit more than his production. He had a half a sack. He only had 4 games this last year because of COVID, but he had half a sack a game, which is a pretty decent rate. But like some of the elite guys get 0.7 sacks a game. He only had 6.5 sacks last year in 12 games, which is close to half a sack a game. So some of these guys that are really elite in terms of production get like 15 sacks in 12 games, and that's not where he is. So I think that he kind of fits the mold of somebody who has more athleticism than production, but I think he still actually did pretty well for Michigan. So as from a Vikings perspective, he kind of fits that. But like, I think that's a different question than the one you asked. Like, not who fits the Viking style of player, but who feels like a Viking from a vibe perspective, who's got like the right kind of hot mess going about him. And that's probably Kadarius Toney, the Florida gadget guy. He's really talented. I don't think he's going to end up being like really remarkably very good. I think he's going to be fun as hell. But I don't think that he's going to be as impactful as a lot of the other receivers. Or actually, Rondale Moore is an even better example. I mean, he's just not built correctly for a first round receiver. You just don't get that many guys his size, like 5'9", right? Guys his size succeed. Like I think he's smaller than Corey Coleman, and he's just not really the way that you would design a first round prospect. That's not where you do. And I think the Vikings are kind of built backwards, right? Like I think they're a run first team that's defense forward. It's kind of silly. But it's worked out for them more often than not recently. And, for Rondale Moore, it's kind of worked out for him more often than not. But I don't think it's going to ever turn into anything huge from him. Like, I think the two gadget guys, Rondale Moore and Kadarius Toney, are like fun. They're kind of a disaster. And I think you'll probably regret picking them.
Well, that's not foreboding at all. Nick Howard asks, rumor has it the team without a name is cutting ties with Alex Smith. If you're the Vikings, would you make a run at him as for a backup?
I don't think you'll be able to outcompete the teams that want him to shepherd a QB. Like, I think there's going to be a couple of teams that have an up and coming quarterback that could use Alex Smith. So, would he be nice to have on the roster as a backup? Yeah, in a vacuum. But I think that the Vikings don't have enough money to seriously contend because, like Matt Castle style bridge quarterbacking or Ryan Fitzpatrick style bridge quarterbacking pays a lot more than backup quarterbacking does. And I don't think the Vikings have that kind of money. If I'm the Vikings, would I talk to his agent for a bit? Yeah, I'd pick up the phone and talk to the agent, but like, I don't think I could seriously make a run at him. No.
Dr. Aaron Matson asks, if you had the ability, we're going back into time travel here. If you had the ability to travel back in time, Avengers time heist style, what's one roster move, trade, signing, draft pick, would you stop the Vikings from making in their history? And what's one they didn't make that you would convince them to do? You could throw in a front office coaching move as well. I know this assumes that Arif would be able to convince whoever making the decisions to listen to him, but let's assume he's able to through impenetrable logic, hypnosis, or etc. So the first thing that comes to mind is the Herschel Walker trade. I'm just going to throw that out there.
Yeah, obviously the Herschel Walker trade. I think that's a bit of a cop out.
Completely. But it doesn't. Yeah. But it has to be said is the problem.
Yeah, And it's not like the wrong answer either. So like it
Yeah.
being a cop out doesn't disqualify it. But I think if we want to make it more contemporary, I think it's the Sam Bradford trade. Like, I mean, Bradford played really well, like really well for the Vikings. They also gave up a first round draft pick in 2017. Remember when I just talked about how great that 2017 quarterback group was? And the best thing about it is that the Vikings wouldn't even be in a position to, or probably I should say, wouldn't even be in a position to accidentally draft Mitchell Trubisky, right? Because the Bears were just so excited they had to trade up from 3 to 2 to draft him, and so maybe the Bears win another game because the Vikings are worse or whatever, and it's tougher, but Patrick Mahomes goes at 10. Deshaun Watson falls all the way to 12. And the Eagles pick for the Vikings, right? That was Derek Barnett, right? Like that was 14. The Vikings are probably losing a couple more games if they don't have Sam Bradford. And if that's the case, they're in prime picking Deshaun Watson or Patrick Mahomes territory. I don't think I have to make a stronger argument.
No, I think as far as contemporary stuff goes, that's pretty much right there, isn't it?
Yeah, and this is pure time travel. We've got the benefit of hindsight. Like it's so easy to say this now. So I want to acknowledge that, but that was the exercise we were just given.
Yes. Let's go to Nolan Kaler, who asks, a question for Arif's dating corner. I have a sneaking suspicion that my girlfriend thinks that I am a Nick Easton in the kitchen. Not ideal, but better than some alternatives. What's a dish that I can make that will impress her that is attainable by a modestly capable former bachelor? So apparently his dating app adventures have come to an end.
Oh, well, congrats. No, congrats. That's not a bad way to describe Nick Easton. So first things first, get a meat thermometer, just like a with a temperature probe, and it'll do wonders for cooking that seems fancy, right? Throw a pot roast in the oven, throw a tenderloin in there. But I mean, we haven't talked with this prompt in mind, but like we've said this a couple of times, slow cookers and instant pots are like magic for this kind of stuff. And there's a bunch of stuff that you could do really easily that seem pretty fancy. I think that you could put together a short rib stew in an instant pot really well. I think a pot roast in a slow cooker or an instant pot comes off looking beautiful, especially if you reduce, like if you like put in red wine and a little bit of beef stock with potatoes and carrots and pot roast and a couple of herbs. Save some of the herbs to drizzle on top, like cut up and drizzle on top later. So you've got like a pop of green, and then put in frozen pearl onions because they seem fancy and honestly they're delicious, but they're perfect for a pot roast. And cut your potatoes and carrots to the size of those pearl onions. Throw them in there and just let them go for a couple hours. With the red wine and the herbs and a little bit of beef stock, it's going to come out delicious. And to make it even fancier, what you can after it's all done cooking, you can pour out all that sauce into a pan, like a nonstick pan, reduce it a little bit, cut up the pot roast and put it on top of a bed of those carrots and potatoes and what have you, and then pour the sauce on top. It's going to be nice and glossy, especially if you mount it with butter. So after you reduce it, turn off the heat and just put in a tablespoon of butter and mix that butter around, cold butter. And as the butter mixes around, it'll emulsify with the rest of the sauce, give it a nice sheen. It'll taste a lot richer. You just pour it right on top. It's crazy easy. It looks insanely fancy. I recommend it. I'm sure I'll find a recipe online to do it. But the slow cooker stuff is like way a great hack for a modestly capable bachelor. Also, I mean, if she doesn't live with you, which, I mean, if you've moved on from like Tinder to having a girlfriend, I assume you're not at that stage yet. Just like get one of those meal subscription plans, because like they do it crazy easy. And the tricks that they use to make things easy for them and for you are like wild. Like they don't put like, if you're making mashed potatoes, they don't give you a little thing of cream, they give you sour cream. And the great thing about sour cream is not only does it keep longer and travel a little bit better, but it like emulsifies a lot better into the sauces or the mashed potatoes or whatever that you're going to use it. They do all these kinds of small tricks, like they make sure that you add a little bit of mustard to a sauce, and without even having to tell you that, hey, mustard contains natural emulsifiers to prevent your sauce from breaking. They do a bunch of this crazy work for you. So if she doesn't live with you, you can like surreptitiously make sure that you've got like a meal delivery kit and like HelloFresh or Open Plate or whatever.
Yeah.
A Blue Apron. They do a pretty good job of holding your hand. But if you're not going to do that, and honestly, it makes a lot of sense not to, I would do the slow cooker.
Slow cooker's not a bad idea. Definitely can see the positives out of that. I would actually go with one or two different things, and I have spoken on the show before about scallops and how it's actually not that difficult to do if you're like paying attention. There is a point at which it goes to rubber, and you need to just kind of not necessarily time it, but you just kind of have to like watch it to make sure that it doesn't end up going, and that you get a little bit of a sear on it, put a little bit of a cream sauce on it, and put onto some regular noodles, linguine or whatever. And it's really not all that difficult to do. And there's plenty of great recipes that you can just quick Google as far as like a scallop pasta dish is concerned. One thing that I think would be interesting is a croque monsieur, which is basically just a special like ham sandwich. It's like a ham and cheese sandwich, but it's just a little bit different. And it's not all that...
and you get to learn how to make a bechamel for it, and it pays you back.
There's things that you can do with it, yes, but there's little things that you can kind of mess around with. There's a great Binging with Babish episode on the on the croque monsieur that's fun to look at. And you can figure out, okay, I cannot make that from scratch. Okay, you don't need to. There's ways around it. So what else do you do? And it's worth the time if you're wanting to really impress her. You can sit down and practice some of this. You have time. Especially if she's not living with you, you might just have to eat a couple of these before you get it right, which is fine. If this is the adventure you want to take, you might as well get some practice on it. Let's go to Ryan, who asks, what is the most controversial prediction your exercise equipment has announced to the world?
I gotta say, it hasn't put a lot out there into the universe. It's really slacking in the take department.
What is your exercise equipment, and does it have social media yet?
I've got like free weights. Like that's it.
Arif's Free Weights is not a Twitter account that exists currently. No,
well, it shouldn't.
It shouldn't, but here we are. And my bike hasn't said anything overly terrible recently. So we'll go with that. We're gonna go to Don from Ohio, and we'll come back to Noah's in just a second. Don from Ohio asks, what was the most surprising thing about the deep pass accuracy chart that came out? That Cousins was number one, Teddy was as high as he was, or somebody was worse than Trubisky.
Yeah, so this was I think it was the one I retweeted out was like deep passes to the left specifically, and Trubisky was second to last, which is very funny to me. But it ruined it. It was Andy Dalton was last, Trubisky was second to last, and it kind of sucks because Andy Dalton only had like 7 attempts deep to the left, but it's not like Trubisky had a ton more, so I can't say the cutoff should have been 8 passes, right? But I mean, it was beautiful. Cousins being number one was kind of funny. Okay, so the thing about this, it's from Brickwall Blitz, I think. The thing about this is I believe that these are hand charted by, what was his name? Jonathan Kinsey. I think they're charted by him. So it's not as if he took the PFF data and just like, here it is. And I think he's got his own interpretation of accurate, not accurate, because in the past, it hasn't really lined up with what I've seen. So it's not completion percentage, and it's not quite the exact same as like PFF drop rate. So they've got their own interpretation. So take it with a grain of salt. Seems to be a Vikings fan, so maybe he's being a little bit generous with Cousins. I remember he was fairly generous with Teddy Bridgewater in the past, but Teddy is always kind of ranked actually fairly high in his metrics relative to what you'd expect. So was I surprised that Teddy was that high in the list? No, because I've seen the work from Brickwall Blitz in the past, and Teddy for whatever processor method that they use, Teddy has always done all right for them. Let's see, where is he ranked? He's ranked 13th. He's tied with Baker Mayfield and Ben Roethlisberger and Tua Tagovailoa and Ryan Tannehill and Saints quarterbacks altogether. That seems to fit. He's an average deep ball thrower. That's historically what Brickwall Blitz has found for this. Kirk Cousins being number one, yeah, funny as hell. But he's also been a very accurate deep ball thrower over the past 3 years. So that's something that I've talked about in the past that gets kind of underrated for Cousins, because people seem to think that because he's kind of a boring quarterback that he doesn't throw deep, but he actually throws deep a fair amount and he does it accurately. He's not like a coward, right? He's not. I don't want to call Alex Smith a coward just because of everything he's been through now, but like
especially now, yes,
right. But like he's not like San Francisco 49ers Alex Smith.
Well, no. Also from Don from Ohio, a relationship corner question. My fiance has really made an effort to get into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We are all caught up on all the movies and all the episodes of WandaVision. She really wants to watch the last episode together. However, that would mean Monday at the earliest, since I'm working 4 straight 12-hour shifts starting Thursday. My question: should I watch it Friday morning after work and watch it again on Monday without telling her that I watched it already? Is my future marriage at stake?
All right. So first, my answer: no. Just watch it with her, and not because it's like morally better to do it because you made an agreement and it's ethical to follow through on your agreements. Sure, that's a pretty good reason too. But like the experience, I just feel like it's not going to be as fun for you either. And if you slip up, it's definitely not going to be fun for her. And it's just kind of easy to just make a mistake. Two, a tip if you are going to do it, make sure that you, if you watch it Friday morning after work, that you let it finish out so that the Disney Plus app doesn't register you as having watched it. And so you click on it again so that it starts again from the very, very beginning, so that red line underneath the show thumbnail for that show doesn't show up. Otherwise, you're going to give the game away. But like, don't do it.
You're terrible at this. You're terrible at this, Arif. I'll tell you why you're terrible. Because I've watched full episodes going all the way to the credits to the end, because you're always looking for that post-credit sequence thing. And it still shows up as like you watched.
No, which is why you click on it again.
No. If he was going to go that route, what he should do is he should create a separate profile on there, watch the damn episode, and then he could delete the thing there. I'm not saying that's what he should do. I'm saying that is the better and more effective way if he was going to go that route. Now,
it is not that much more efficient than just clicking on the show title again.
Go back to all of yours that you've gone all the way through. It didn't go all the way.
I did it like 2 days ago when, because I get really annoyed when they're not full out, right? Like if I have like 5 episodes in a row that I've watched and the red bars are all the way, and then the next 2 I've also watched, but the second to last one doesn't have that bar, I'll go up and scrub forward in the show to do it. I've done this a lot because I'm weird and I hate that. And yeah, if you click on it again so that it plays from the beginning and you click out right away, it's going to and you can double check, like you can look and see.
Oh, absolutely. But the Disney Plus app, or wherever you're watching it on laptop or on phone or whatever, is a bit fickle. and it can show the full amount, and still, regardless of the fact that you've like tried repeatedly, sometimes it just chooses a random spot in the middle of the credits to just choose as to like where it's going to be. So if he wanted to go that route, it would be easier to just
Anyway,
not worry about that.
Do it. Like, wow, it sounds so tough. Why? Maybe it's not even worth it. Don't do it.
I'm not advocating that he do that. I'm saying that it would be a much better solution if somebody else. I'm not trying to get Don in trouble.
If you create a new profile, remember to delete the profile. Otherwise, that's going to look like really weird.
Yes, that is the obvious thing to do there. Don, what can I say? You know, the point of, as far as I can tell, the point of marriage is supposed to be that her problems become your problems and vice versa. Your wins become her wins become yours. And that you're putting yourself in an odd spot by cheating on this particular moment, especially because she went out of her way to catch up with things. She found something that you were very interested in and took an interest in it, and by proxy took an interest in something more of you. And so if you want to ruin that for her, in her mind or your mind, whether or not she finds out that you did it, that's your own business. But if that's what she's taken an interest in this, it seems like a dumb thing to do to get involved in watching.
This isn't even like a typical r/relationships post, because those tend to be like very one-sided and only present one side of the story. But Dawn started out this question with, my fiance has really made an effort to get into the Marvel Cinematic. Like, you stacked the question on her side, which I guess props to you, but you already know the answer you want, which is don't do it.
It's a bit like that time when he was asking about like, about the fact that like she was on his insurance on something and was debating asking her to marry him. I was like, dude, she's on your insurance. Just do it. What the hell? What is wrong with you? Also, to Arif, I would like to congratulate Arif on his alma mater, the Southern Illinois Salukis, and their dominating win versus the unbelievably overrated NDSU team. It goes to show what happens when a community college team finally plays a real NCAA program. What would you like to say about the Southern Illinois Salukis?
My Salukis, the very program that birthed Rick Spielman, the very program that led to Vikings legend Michael Pruitt, just an incredible program. The other Craig James went there. Jeremy Chin, one of the candidates for Defensive Player of the Year, and alma mater of my Salukis. So, Bart Scott, legendary linebacker for the Baltimore Ravens and for a brief period of time the New York Jets. Running back Brandon Jacobs, just really incredible program. I can't think of a program that's produced better NFL players or executives than the SIU Salukis. So, yeah, I'm overjoyed, right? I think that the Salukis proved their worth, proved who they were, and demonstrated at the same time that North Dakota State overrated. Can't even get anything done without that safety, whatever his name is, playing quarterback. I guess they just don't have anybody waiting in the wings. Preseason rankings had NDSU as one of the favorites to make the FCS playoffs. Can't even get that done. And the thing is, when things were tough, when the chips were down in the fourth quarter, NDSU couldn't get anything going. And you know what? James Madison, things were pretty tough for them at halftime. No one was scoring 8 points. I think they were, it was a 3-point game, 3-6, just an awful game. And they just put together like a 20-point second half, just really incredible stuff. And that's just kind of the stuff that champions are made of, that like when things are tough and the chips are down, you don't let reality punch you in the mouth. You punch reality in the mouth, a thing that we often say. So congratulations to my Salukis, which, I mean, it feels a little bit weird to congratulate them on winning a game that they should have won, that we all expected they would win. And, punching down is, we don't congratulate Alabama for beating Temple, right? But
that was the one that got me.
I just, it's good to see that in a game that saw as much exposure as the Salukis NDSU game, that the Salukis were able to kind of prove their worth to a national audience, as well as to the audience in Carbondale Stadium, which has a seating capacity that Wikipedia tells me is 15,000 people.
I was going to ask which Wikipedia article you were reading off of during most of that. I did tell you yesterday to be prepared for this question, so just wanted to make sure on that, and I wanted to make sure that that you mentioned that your Dukes also are on a great winning streak at the moment. So,
oh yeah, no, they're killing it.
Yeah,
they're tops in the FCS. They're number one, obviously, in the Colonial Athletic Association, the conference that I care so deeply about that they're in. And 2-0, really great. I am a little bit worried because second game of the season you run into some trouble, but they showed exactly kind of the grittiness that they're made of. So
we still need to get something from their football organization named after you. We still need to get the cherry picker or something named after Arif Hassan. We have one more question. It does involve a slight reference to WandaVision. So if you haven't watched it, we're going to try not to have too many spoilers on this one question. But if you are afraid of such things, now would be a good time to end. But we do have a question involving WandaVision and the Vikings. It says, from Noah, in almost every episode of WandaVision, there is some sort of fictional ad that highlights a traumatic moment in Wanda Maximoff's life. If someone were to design a similar concept, but for torturing a Vikings fan with depressing and dumb moments from Vikings history, what fictional products would be advertised? I'm thinking a relaxing boat ride on Lake Minnetonka would be included, and maybe some sort of shoe brand sponsored by Blair Walsh and or Gary Anderson.
Man, there's so many possibilities here. Like snowproof roofing, right? Like roofing that won't collapse under the weight of snow.
Yep, that would be good.
Ankle lubricant for Brett Favre, right?
Actually, I was going to go the route of Brett Favre and cell phone endorsements.
I was thinking cell phone, but I didn't want to. This podcast is not explicit, not rated explicit on iTunes, but a cell phone with a great camera that makes everything. The filters on the camera make everything look a lot better than they are.
Boy, that just brought things to a screeching halt. Let's see what else could what else Viking oriented. I mean,
like anything related to the Eagles, for example. So anything related to maybe an Eagle wildlife preserve or something like that. Maybe something just related to the Saints in general. There's the fleur-de-lis. So you could have something about the Boy Scouts, which have a fleur-de-lis just like the Saints. A commercial with like oblique references throughout featuring a Boy Scout.
What about for the Eagles thing? Like it's a special camp. Oh, and you can make sure to take exit 387.
Oh, yeah, that's good. I like that. Yeah. Was there like a moment? There wasn't really a moment in the Eagles game. Maybe when Harrison Smith got turned around by Zach Ertz, but not like a moment. I think with Brett Favre, you got a couple of moments, right? The time that I keep on thinking it's Israel Adonijah, but it wasn't. It was another Bears defensive end that just crushed him into the frozen dirt of TCF. Who was it? It wasn't Julius Peppers. I know that. Anyway.
The bear that ended Brett Favre's career. Yeah.
Yeah. You do a commercial with that. Oh, how about this? What about a teddy bear that is missing one of its legs?
Ouch. Yeah.
That one's pretty good.
Like that, like it can fall off during the commercial. Yeah.
Yes. Oh yeah. Perfect. Yeah. Especially because like the claymation commercial for the 90s episode of the WandaVision. Yeah. That's perfect.
Something like that. But that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Arif, where can they find your work?
So obviously you can find me on Twitter, Arif Hassan NFL. But my pieces are posted at The Athletic, theathletic.com/author/Arif-Hassan. Those two pieces I mentioned, the splash free agents and the more realistic free agents are up. I've got another piece coming up about Vikings players most likely to kind of break out that are under the radar. That's coming up soon. I'm also helping run the mock draft tracker, where we're just tracking various, not even just tracking mock drafts, but primarily, but also just various draft news things and kind of keeping people updated. That gets updated every day. I'm running that along with Ben Standig. So you can head over to The Athletic and check that out as well.
All right, well, that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Hope you guys have enjoyed it. We'll be back in about 2 weeks to talk about other Vikings and NFL news. So until then, for Arif, my name is James, and please remember to punch reality right in the mouth. And we'll be back in about 2 weeks. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's official Vikings blog, at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Stitcher, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. You can also find his written work at theathletic.com. I am your podcast host and producer, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or my personal account at Big Mono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or you can make a recurring monthly contribution by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. A donation of $3.50 per month does get you bonus material from the show and much more. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.